Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar. We're very excited to present to you from our expertise, powerful presentations, and really do believe that they are the key to your success. I am Beth Rudy, and I just want to tell you just a little bit about Insight Management Consulting, the organization that's bringing you this program today. We're a leadership development firm. We have offices in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Utah, and we help individuals and organizations make positive, sustainable change through training, speaking, consulting, and coaching. Some of the programs that we take into organizations are the 5 Behaviors of Cohesive Teams, which is powered by DISC. Personified Leadership is a 2-day leadership development program that's also powered by DISC. And you may recall, some of you may have been on my presentation last year that I did on what motivates me. In fact, I did 2 of them for SAME last year. We also represent Vital Smarts, Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability. So basically, we go into organizations and help with leadership, employee engagement, communications training, just really good soft skills that help organizations grow. And a little bit about me. I have worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, and I've worked with some of the largest school districts, universities, and government agencies. So you can see that on the slide, some of the organizations that I have worked with. And I attribute much of my success to the skills that I developed through Toastmasters. So you're going to hear Dan and I talk a lot about our experiences through Toastmasters. And we're not here to sell Toastmasters, really. We can't sell Toastmasters. It is a nonprofit organization that both of us have benefited greatly from. So we're just sharing with you a great resource. Neither of us benefit from sharing it. It's just a fabulous resource that has changed our lives. A few years ago, I left my very lucrative career working for these big companies to pursue some of my personal and professional goals. And in the process of doing that, I was able to clearly articulate what I did want to do and what I didn't want to do. And really, today, I am a professional speaker, trainer, coach, and consultant, and it's because of the confidence and the courage that I found through Toastmasters and being able to find my voice. So I can say that today, I do what I love. I build trusting relationships with executives who hire me to come in and allow me to help them build healthier teams for their organizations. And I just love impacting lives. But bigger than that, I just want to introduce my friend Dan Hershey, and he's the star of the show today, and I want him to, you're going to love his story. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you the impact that Toastmasters and I had on his life. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, thank you, Beth. You give some of the best intros out there. My name is Dan Hershey. I'm a licensed civil engineer, and I've been practicing for about 20 years. I graduated from UPJ, University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, and worked about 6 years for the city of Lancaster in their engineering department, doing primarily water and wastewater work. And I've been in consulting for about 14 years now. And last January 2016, I finally realized a dream of mine and went out on my own and started my own engineering consulting firm, Hershey Engineering. I'm a member of Toastmasters like Beth, and my minor claim to fame within the Toastmasters community is I placed in the top 30 out of 30,000 people in their international speech contest. So it's a contest I've been holding every year since the 40s, and I was able to get to what I like to say the top 0.1% in that. So that was a big accomplishment for me. I'm also the immediate past president of the Waterworks Operators Association, and I've given several talks at industry conferences. To be clear, I'm an engineer, not a professional speaker by any means. The reason I'm on the call today, I was able to overcome a real debilitating fear of public speaking through Toastmasters. And specifically 18 words of encouragement that I received during my time in Toastmasters. And it's really made all the difference in my career and my personal life. So if I can just give you a brief story of how I got from there to here, if you can imagine, 20 years ago, I was standing in front of about 50 engineers, parents, students, presenting my senior year engineering project. So it was 5 minutes in front of an audience was really all that stood between me and getting my engineering degree. And that was 5 minutes of nausea, the cold sweats, and that laser pointer that's shaking like you're having a seizure. I tried to point at the bridge abutment. And then sitting down after it was over, I just recall this twinkling of stars in my eyes and someone elbowing me in the ribs, like, Hershey, get off him. So have you ever passed out? I mean, have you ever had that feeling you wake up, you have no idea where you are, what you're doing? Well, that was the low point in a lifetime fear of public speaking for me. And I swore from that moment on, I would never, ever, never speak in public again. I didn't want anyone to know I'd passed out. I really didn't want anyone to know the depth of my fear and the shame I felt over passing out. So luckily for me, I chose one of the best professions for people with social anxiety. And I'll just say that the expectations are low for the communication skills of engineers. So for 15 years, I really kept my word and just avoided public speaking or speaking up in meetings and just tried to hide in my cubicle basically as much as I could. But as you advance through your career, you keep getting forced more and more into speaking situations where I either had to present to clients or in municipal meetings. And I think what finally pushed me over the edge was I had to present at a zoning hearing board. So I was complaining to some of the fellow engineers in the office and, how I was thinking about calling in sick to this thing or something, any way to get out of it. And one of them said, hey, Dan, we're thinking about going to a meeting for this club. It's called Toastmasters. And supposedly they can help people like us, get over our fear of public speaking. So a few days later, 3 of us, me and 2 of my buddies from work, were guests at a Franklin and Marshall College Toastmasters meeting. And we were so impressed by the end of the meeting, all 3 of us decided to sign up right there and become members. By the very next day, one of us had already dropped out, and 3 months later, my other friend dropped out. So I was the last one in the club after 3 months. For whatever reason, I decided to stay, and I kept going to meetings hoping that I would become a better public speaker without ever having given a speech. I figured if I paid my dues, maybe this will just come through, osmosis or something. But after about 6 months, I finally got to the point I said, this is it, it's enough. It's time to do it. I'm just going to quit. Why keep going through this agony, worrying about having to give a speech or something? So I figured I'd sign up one last time, just say goodbye to everybody, and that would be the end of it. And I looked at the agenda for the next meeting, and someone had signed me up as a speaker. So if you've ever had those moments where, you're committed to something, and it was just like, my name's there, I've been thinking about this speech for 6 months, I'm just going to give it, and then I'm done, and then I'm definitely quitting. So a couple of weeks later, I gave the speech, got through it without passing out, and afterward, club members came up to me and just said some really nice things. Dan, I really enjoyed your speech, you did a great job. And at the time, all I could think was, man, you people are such horrible liars. I mean, I knew everything, how awful it was, but they had nothing but nice things to say. And I told them, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure knowing you, but I'm quitting the club. And one of the members slipped me this tiny note, and I shoved it in my pocket, and I left. And I swore from then on I was never, ever, never speaking in public again after that. And then afterwards, I was sitting in my car while I pulled out that note, which I still have to this day. And on it, it read, Dan, great icebreaker. What a heartwarming story. I look forward to hearing more about you in future speeches. And with 18 words, 18 really simple words, but because of those words of encouragement, I decided to stay in Toastmasters right then and there. And it took me 26 months, over 2 years, to complete just 10 speeches in the Toastmasters Confident Communicator Manual, which is their basic manual. These are 5 to 7 minute long speeches. So all told, it's like 60 minutes of talking in front of a group. But I got through it, and the day I completed that manual, I swore I would never, ever, never let fear stop me from speaking in public again. Now, my life and career took a completely different turn thanks to those 18 words of encouragement. And thanks to those words and the Toastmasters program, I've taken the leap to realize my dream of starting my own engineering consulting firm and really be able to manage the fear and anxiety that come through from public speaking. And the other reason I'm on the call, it was Beth Rudy that had shared those 18 words of encouragement with me. And she had no idea until about 2 years ago when I shared this story in a speech, the impact that her words actually had on my life. So when she asked me if I wanted to be part of this webinar, I was happy to help. Hopefully at least one of you'll get some tips on public speaking and communication, but if you're nervous about this, you can get on the path to gain confidence, to stand up in front of a group of people and really share your ideas. And with that introduction, I'd like to move into the meat of the presentation and talk about some of the benefits of good public speaking skills. Propel your career forward, like I said, if it wasn't for being able to communicate with people, because that's how we get work, especially as consultants, is being able to share our ideas and talk to people. When I go to networking events now, I don't feel like I'm just spending my time hoping it'll be over, or finding a corner to go stand on, or looking just for the people I know to talk to. It can really get you out there and allow you to expand your career. My time as president of WWOAP, the Waterworks Operators Association, was because of being able to speak, and it got me onto the board where I could actually talk in meetings rather than just hoping they were over. And that's made all the difference in the world too, having those connections, feeling confident enough to step out on my own. And the bit about improving morale, one thing that came through really getting the fear under control and getting more comfortable was I have the confidence now, I think, to be more authentic in a sense. When you meet people, you can be more reserved and quiet. It really just allows me to be more of myself out there. And I think that was something I wasn't expected. I went into it just hoping, hey, I can get through a talk without feigning, to I can get out and I can talk about some personal items like this. The story I shared earlier, I would have never shared before Toastmasters or anything, or something that personal, I should say. So our learning objectives today, we want to understand the components of a powerful presentation. Beth and I are going to pass back and forth. We've broken the talk into the opening of your talk, and I might split back and forth between presentation and speech, kind of using those interchangeably. So it's broken down into the opening, the body, and the conclusion. And then at the end, we'll share some tips and tricks that have helped us either with improving our presentations or maybe calming our nerves. And then Beth will wrap up with sharing some information about Toastmasters International. the beginning of your speech is really, the beginning and the end are two of your big critical parts. It's really the parts that a lot of people will remember, and especially in the beginning, it's your opportunity to really capture the audience's attention. I think we've all been to those openings where it just kind of starts out drab and introducing the, starts out drab and just talking about the speech rather than just getting to and getting started. So the chance to really establish your rapport, let the people know who you are, it really only needs to take maybe 5 to 10% of the entire speech time. And that's just a guideline for you. So I'll talk about some opening techniques and then share some specific examples that I've used over the years or that I've seen other people use that I thought were really effective. You can start with stating the importance of your topic or make a startling statement. One presentation we had to do when I was working for Rudy Associates as a consultant was to do some training for zebra mussels. They're an aquatic invasive species on the Ohio River. And as part of their permit, they were required to do internal training for their workers and their truck drivers and that. Guys that really could have cared less about zebra mussels. So worked with the client, and the way we started the speech, the client started, and they started, you may be asking yourself, why the hell am I here today? What do I care about zebra mussels? And at that, we flashed this image up there. And then I'd go into the talk and talk on the upper left, that's a surface water intake with zebra mussels. The lower right is a crayfish that's coated in them. In fact, the biologists always love to point out that's the crayfish is actually an invasive species. So you thought, well, you know, it's kind of the universe equaling itself out. But really using these images to drive home the point and wake them up, this is why we need to care. So your startling statement might not have to be a statement. It could be in the sense that it could be a verbal or visual kind of statement to wake them up. I like to think of it when you go into your speech, what's important for the audience? What do they need to know? Why are you talking? And so that's why we use this as the opening. You could arouse suspense or curiosity, or tell a story or an anecdote. I was doing a talk on on-site sodium hypochlorite generation, which I know sounds exciting, but it's not the most exciting topic. And I wanted to capture the audience's attention at the beginning. And that gets back, I sat down like, why are we even having this discussion? Why are we even considering OSG, on-site generation, when chlorine gas is so much cheaper? And it really comes down to the safety of it. And thinking of a way to relate to the audience, this is a picture of the 9/11 memorial. And that's really why we're having this conversation, because we need to move away from chlorine gas, and OSG is one of our options. So I simply started the talk with, you know, that brief introduction of we're here today to talk about OSG, but I think it's important to remember why. And I flashed this up and I said, do you remember where you were on 9/11? And just pause, a long pause. And most of the people there, you can see, you know, when the eyes look up to the left, or they sit there and they would nod their head, because I think just about anybody can remember where they were that day. And then I just shared a little bit of my, you know, where I was that day. I only took maybe 30 seconds, a minute on this, and just ended with, I think it's important that we remember why we're having this conversation. So I think you can really try to grab their attention and link it to why you're talking. And I'll just note too, I've grouped these together just in the sense that none of these openings are mutually exclusive. I mean, you can combine them together however you want. And if you're just starting out, just pick one, keep things simple in the beginning. You could ask a rhetorical question. My question, where were you on 9/11, really was a rhetorical question. Or begin with a quotation. One of the my favorite speeches I gave in Toastmasters started with a quote that I really like by Maya Angelou. And I just started with, right off the bat, words out of my mouth, where people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And the first time I read that quote, I thought, man, what a bunch of baloney. I mean, come on, people are going to forget what you said and what you did. And, you know, what's all this about feelings? I mean, I'm a man and an engineer. What possible use in the world do I have for feelings? So that was kind of the opening, begin with a quotation, kind of like a shocking statement, because most people love Maya Angelou. And then the rest of the speech was then through my evolution of understanding what that quote actually means. So beginning with a quotation, and you can do all sorts of things with it from there. You can reference the occasion and ask for audience participation. You know, that's a great one. I would say, though, if you're an inexperienced speaker, maybe leave that one, because once you involve the audience, you never know what's going to come up. So that's probably a more advanced kind of technique. Or do a demonstration. It's fairly self-explanatory. As engineers, we've got a lot of opportunities to do demonstrations. One I did was simple. I filled 2 jugs of water. One was like dirty water in a plastic jug, and the other one's clear. And I asked, you know, people, which one would you want to drink out of? And of course, they picked the clear one. Or which one is safer? I asked, which would you drink out of? And the answer really is we didn't know, because the dirty water actually passed all the testing when the other one had high levels of lead. So maybe that wasn't as much a demonstration, but you can use props and things. That's very memorable for people when you can bring something physical into your talk. It doesn't necessarily have to be in PowerPoint to exist. And I'll wrap up with openings to avoid. Please don't start your talk with, I'm sorry, I really wish I had more time to prepare with this. They weren't really the slides I wanted, and you know, my boss really just popped this on me the other day, the person I was filling in. But here we go, I'm going to give you a 45-minute lecture on zebra mussels. You know, once you start like that, people have already tuned out. Yeah, if you haven't been able to prepare, just start in your speech. Let them figure it out as you go. But if you start with the apology or saying how unprepared you are, you're going to lose them right away. In fact, we had someone in our Toastmasters club. She was giving a speech, 5 minutes, on Alzheimer's. And she was up there, she just talked, you know, had notes with her, sat down, and at the end of each speech in Toastmasters, you get a 2 to 3 minute evaluation. And it's not as bad as it sounds, because 90% of it is positive, especially what did you do well. And then maybe, you know, 10% is 1 or 2 things for you to work on in your next speech. And one of her suggestions was, somebody said, well, it would have been nice if you had PowerPoint when you're talking about some of the notes or handouts to show. And she's like, yeah, it would have been nice, except I forgot it at home. So the whole talk was supposed to have PowerPoint with it, but none of us knew. I mean, the audience has no idea what your talk is going to be, what it's supposed to. You go up there and you give it confidently, and a lot of times you can give a great speech. That really showed me that people, you just go into it, know your material, and do it, that you can get over things are missing, things don't go right. Avoid being dull and boring, I think, as it was saying. And I'd say avoid jokes, in the sense, it doesn't mean you can't use humor, tell a humorous story or something, but just lay off the jokes. I mean, if the wrong audience, they can go over like a lead balloon, and you lose a lot of the people right off the bat. And at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Beth, and she's going to talk about the body of the speech.
Okay, so thanks, Dan, for the great information on how to prepare opening. So I'm going to talk about organizing the body of the speech. Hopefully you can hear me. I had to switch phones, and I'm on my cell phone now. So if you can't hear me, send a chat message to Nicole, and she'll get me adjusted. So I want to just share with you how I organize my speeches. So once you've gotten their attention, how do you put it together? And I had a speaking coach, and my speaking coach is actually the one who referred me to Toastmasters, and it actually took me a couple years before I got the courage to go to Toastmasters. People actually hear me today, and they think that I have always been such a confident communicator, and that is far from the case. But my speaking coach taught me an easy-to-remember acrostic for the word peer. And the word peer actually means, according to Merriam-Webster, it's an immediate support for the adjacent ends of two bridge spans. So think about it in a speech or a presentation. It's the immediate support for the opening and the closing. And the acrostic, that's easy to remember, is point, instruction, experience, and reference. Point, instruction, experience, and reference. So I'm going to show you how I would put together a presentation. So I do a lot of speaking and training on employee engagement. And one of the programs that we do is What Motivates Me, which is a program developed by Chester Elton and Adrian Gustick. And they tell a story. And they tell a story about Michelangelo. And so recently, when I was doing a presentation, the title of my presentation was Silencing the Critics. And I feel like I need to share with you my opening. It'll give you an example of an opening and how I moved in to the point I wanted to make. So I open with a story that I heard Chester tell in What Motivates Me, and it goes like this. Come with me on a journey back to Florence in 1504. Michelangelo had just unveiled his latest statue of biblical hero David. Local artists who had come to see the statue, this latest work of art, complained the right hand was just a touch too big. The neck was a tad too long. The left shin was oversized, and something about the buttocks was not quite right. So the head of the Florentine Empire informed Michelangelo that David's nose was just too long. The frustrated artist climbed back up on the ladder with marble dust in his hand, and then he appeared to chisel at David's offending snout. But in reality, he was just letting the dust fall to the ground. The leader examined the unchanged nose and announced, much improved. Well, Michelangelo knew that he had created a masterpiece, and he silenced the critics. He saw a possibility where others saw a mishandled piece of rock. And he said, in every block of marble, I see a statue as plain as though it stood before me. I only have to hew away the rough walls that imprison it. So there is a lesson in this for all of us. We all have tremendous potential and have faced critics who have tried to silence it. That's the point I was making in my presentation, Silencing the Critics. We all have tremendous potential, and we've faced critics who have tried to silence it. Okay, so once I hit my point, then instruction. Now it doesn't have to be, point needs to be first, and the rest of the IER can be in any order. We're just going to go in order of peer though for simplicity, okay? So instruction. What are you going to tell them? What information are you going to give them to take away? So the instruction that I was going to provide was when we believe in ourselves and put our passions to work, we can silence the critics and fulfill our potential. So you have your point, you have your instruction. Then you go on and you share an experience. So in this presentation, you know, people remember stories. And so I went on and I said, let me tell you a story. And it's a story about my son who silenced the critics and learned, and by silencing the critics, he earned a highly competitive internship at Mayo Clinic. So I went on and I said in my presentation, where others saw a kid with limited abilities, my son like Michelangelo believed in himself. He put his passions to work, he silenced the critics, and against all odds earned one of 8 highly competitive internships at the prestigious Mayo Clinic. You know, people remember stories. So I would say, you know, you might be thinking, oh, you know, cut the fluff and stuff, we're engineers. But I can remember telling Dan early on in his Toastmaster journey, like after about the 4th speech on pipes and wastewater systems, you know, Dan, if you want to impact the audience and set yourself apart from other engineers, why don't you try to bring those inanimate objects to life with stories that everyone can relate to? And you can see that he has done that by the illustrations that he used in his opening. So we can tell stories. They don't all have to be personal. They can be stories of other people, stories like 911, stories like the zebra mussels. But don't be afraid to get real with your audience. Share your personal experiences and let others get to know you, because that's one of the ways you establish credibility. I get a lot of my jobs and the projects that I do helping organizations because I go out and speak. And when I'm speaking, I'm often sharing stories about myself, stories about my family, challenges I've overcome, and it's the authenticity that builds trust. Just last week, I was in at the FDA, and I was the trusted advisor with an ethics team. And so there's a lot of scientists in that organization. And, you know, and I don't go in and I'll just always tell the fluff and stuff, but it's the stories that connect people. So think about sharing your experiences and stories to support your point. And then the R in peer stands for reference. So here's an example of reference, and that would be people who believe in themselves and put their passions to work, produce higher quality works, greater output, and earn higher incomes, and they're 150% more likely to have a happier life overall. And that is a reference supported by or provided by University of California, Professor Sonia, I can't say her last name, but we want to give credit where credit is due. So many speakers are attempting to rehash or even outright copy content from other speakers or writers and present it as their own, thinking that this will make them appear smarter, when in reality it's really citing the references and giving credit where credit is due is what makes you look smarter. It shows that you didn't just make something up. That the point you're making or the instruction that you're offering is valid, proven, and effective. So references or resources can include charts, quotes, interviews. Use your imagination. Don't copy someone word for word without their permission. So respect the copyright laws. Now, concepts are not copyrighted. So it's fine to rework someone else's concept. The story of Michelangelo that I told is not copyrighted. It's a concept. And so I retold it, but when I retold it, I told you that I first heard it through Chester Elton. So do you see how you give credit where credit is due? I didn't take ownership that I created that story, even though I modified it to fit my style. Does that make sense? All right, so moving along, in creating your body. So we'll use the peer example, the peer acrostic, point, instruction, experience, and resources. So resources, your support materials can be statistics, which are all kinds of data. Testimonies, which would be stories. So like, for example, when Dan and I opened today, we both gave a testimony of what Toastmasters has done for us. It's our opinions. You can use examples, and examples again would be like the story that I told about my son, or the example that Dan used of the zebra mussels or 911. It can be visual aids. Visual aids can be diagrams, charts, pictures, models, or other objects. And it can be facts. Facts are verifiable information. They're not opinions. Whatever support you choose, make sure it's relevant to the point you're trying to make. Okay, so when you go from part to part in your speech, remember the definition of peer, according to Merriam-Webster. It's an immediate support for adjacent ends of two bridge spans. Well, think of transitions as those things that help you move between the spans. So transitions are used as you move from the opening to the body, from the main point to a subpoint. So I don't know if you were like listening, but you can listen as we move on for how Dan and I transition. As we are moving through this presentation, we have worked together to come up with smooth transitions so that the audience can easily follow. And I have put together some transitional words and phrases for you to consider using. I'm not going to read all of them because I know that you can read, but we can use phrases like according to, or, you know, when I was telling the story about my son, for example, let me tell you a story, or in addition to. So those are just really great words and phrases that can be used, and certainly it's not an all-inclusive list. Use your imagination, but transitioning will help your presentation flow more smoothly. And then I just want to leave you with the benefits of a well-organized speech. So have you ever listened to a speech and you're just like, you can't follow it? You don't know where the speaker is going? Well-organized speeches are easy to follow. They're easy to understand. I often use an acrostic to get across my points. So the acrostic like peer, like I just used that as an acrostic to put together the body of my presentation today. Is that something that you'll remember? Probably likely. I have come up with an acrostic for listen when I speak on listening. Another way, another easy, these are some tips kind of going off of my script here, but another thing that I do is I think of alliteration. So alliteration would be where you have 3 words that begin with C to make your 3 points. Again, it's something that's very easy to remember. So you might, I can't think of 3 C words off the top of my head, but 3 points, each begin with the same letter. It's a very easy way to remember your own speech and the points you want to make. And it's also an easy way for your audience to remember. Being well organized makes you more credible, it makes you more enjoyable, and the audience will be more engaged. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, who's going to give you some tips for successfully closing your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Beth. So criteria for a successful closing, this is where you want to achieve a sense of closure and make an impact. The closing is what people will most remember from your speech many times. And I like to think, when I get to the end, what do I want people to do after this talk? I mean, sometimes we're just sharing information, but do you want them to do something with that information, or what do you really want them to get out of your talk? Some closing techniques: use a quotation. You could use the same quotation used in a talk, and also it doesn't have to be a famous person. I did a talk for Calico Middle School. It was their first auditory event, and I found a quote from their teacher in the newspaper, and I used that in the speech. And then I asked people, does anyone know who said this? And it had a very Abraham Lincoln type sound to it. But it was the teacher, so it was a nice tie-in for the students and the teacher who really took the time to put the event together. So you could pull from someone you know or someone tied to the event you're at. Beth mentioned stories. Stories are really memorable. If you can come up with a good story, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be. It can be personal. Doesn't have to be. I started one speech with a story. It was on design of water storage tanks. And I knew I wanted the audience to leave there with the sense that they need to evaluate the amount of storage they have in their water system. I actually started the speech, just stood up there, put up a blank slide, and put my hand to my head like I was talking on the phone. So, you know, July 7th, 2011, I got a call from Lewis Larson, the water operator. Dan, I need your help. We're losing water in the system. The tanks are going to be empty in 2 to 3 hours, and the system will be dry. What can we do? And the point was 2 to 3 hours is not enough storage in the system. Well, the way that was the beginning. The way I wrapped up the speech was I said, and you remember that story in the beginning when Lewis called and said he's got a leak in the system, the tank's draining. So it turns out it wasn't a leak. It was actually a fire pump that had kicked on in the system, was pumping 1,500 gallons per minute into a detention basin in the back of the property that no one saw. And the point is, you have no idea what's going on in your water system. And that's why it's crucial you go back and you evaluate not just how much storage you have, but how much effective storage you have in your system. So you can really use the story tied in from beginning to end. That's point number 5 on there, refer back to the beginning of the speech. I really like that idea of symmetry, of using what you had at the beginning at the end to kind of tie everything back together. That gets into the call for action. So with that story, I talked about evaluating your storage. Really think about, what do I want people to do when I'm done talking, or what do I want them to know? And when you can cut down to the core of that why, really help put your speech together. I'd say one big tip is to try as best you can to memorize your conclusion. You don't really have to read it, but really know your conclusion down. Again, it's because it's what people are going to remember. You don't want to spend time bringing up new points or going around. Get to your conclusion and get the point to them so they walk away knowing what to do. End on time. Has anyone ever complained about the speaker right before lunch, wrapping up 10 minutes early? You don't want to, try to respect people's time, begin on time, end on time as best you can. And refrain from adding new points as you go through. So I'd like to go over some tips and tricks, best practices we've learned over the years. Like I said, really memorizing your opening and your closing. For me, calming my nerves, that really knowing my opening down cold has worked better than anything. And that really captures the audience because they know then you put in the work to be prepared. It gets them into the speech. And when I practice now, I used to do it where I'd sit in front of the PowerPoint or in the car and I'd just run it through in my head without really saying it out loud. What I would suggest is you really stand up, picture that you're standing in front of that audience, and I talk to the wall all the time. And if I'm going to be doing this in a suit and tie, I'll put on that suit and tie at least once. That's really just to calm my nerves, to get me comfortable, to know that everything's ready. And I'm sure you've experienced before, an idea sounds great in your head, and as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you're like, ooh, what was I thinking? So I really say practice it out loud so you can get through it, and it just gets you more comfortable. Really, the other thing is picturing positive responses. It's so easy to go down the track of thinking of all the things that go wrong. When I was getting ready for this talk today, it's very odd right now. I feel like I'm just talking to my computer screen, but I'm picturing, people enjoying this, getting something out of it. Someone going, aha, I really can get over my fear of public speaking, or I know what to do for my next speech to really make it impactful. Why not picture the positive? You don't have to live and be Pollyanna about it, but you can at least focus on the positives. And I saw one of the questions was about dreading, or the responses about dreading the Q&A. That was one of my worst points too. I don't mind the preparation. It's the impromptu that still can get me nervous. I can still feel those nerves come up. I can control them now, but they're there. You can prepare for Q&A. I mean, when you do your talk, you've probably got a pretty good idea of the questions that are going to be asked. So a lot of times if I'm giving a big speech, I'll sit down and I'll write out every question I think that's going to come up and prepare a response to it. or at least think through a response. And then when most times those questions come, you're ready for it. You may get one out of left field, but just going through the act of preparation will help you get through that. Or you can just say, I'll have to look into that, I'll get back to you, but you've handled the other 10 questions. So it all runs much more smoothly. Just to give you a reference here, Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. Highly recommend the book just for putting together a PowerPoint, how to really look at graphics and images, and how to structure a speech. It was a great reference. And the call to action is, join Toastmasters. I'll close with my favorite quote attributed to Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. Forget how you made them feel. And it's not that what we say and do doesn't matter. It matters because they create the feelings that cause people to remember. Now, if I didn't save that slip of paper with the 18 words, I would have never remembered exactly what the words were. But over 5 years, 7 years later now, I can still look back and remember the feeling from that day sitting in that car. And the feeling that I could finally conquer, my fear of public speaking. If you're struggling with fear of public speaking, I challenge you to join your local Toastmasters club. You can make a commitment to improve. It's really a safe place to grow as a speaker, a leader, and a communicator. It's the best investment you can make in your career. And if you're an accomplished speaker or communicator, I really challenge you to reach out and help someone with encouragement to improve and get over their fear. You're a professional, you're a manager, you're a supervisor. Your words can really have a positive impact on the lives of the people around you, and even if you don't find out for years later. So thank you, and I would like to turn it over to Beth now so she can share her
Okay, so I just want to answer the question too that is in the box. How have you learned to control your nerves before a speech? Well, believe it or not, I used to be very nervous as well. My hands would shake. I never passed out like Dan did. But I can remember after I did my icebreaker, that was like 10 years ago, somebody came up to me 30 minutes later and said, "Let me see your hand." And it was still shaking. One of the things, it does just take a lot of practice, which is why we are such advocates for Toastmasters, because Toastmasters is a great, safe place to practice. At one point, for me, now I'm a little like off the chart, overachiever, driven maniac. I was in 4 Toastmaster clubs at one time so that I could speak twice a week. But I knew that I wanted to also speak professionally, and I knew that I needed a lot of practice. So what I do now, when every single time I speak, is I just get up and I have a slide about me. Or I open this with about insight, about what we do, and then I talked about me and my family. And I just find that that's what I'm comfortable with. And if I am stammering through that, it's no big deal. That just helps me get my bearings so that when I need to go into the rest of my presentation, I have kind of gotten that out of my system and my nerves have settled a little bit. But I want to leave you with some other tips and tricks that I have discovered as I've been out there speaking. And I probably now, I bet this year I'm going to have spoken between speeches, training, and webinars probably 100 times. So I would say know your audience. If you know your audience, you know their goals and their needs, you've kind of done a need assessment up front, tailor your presentation to meet the needs of your audience. Know your subject. If you're not the subject matter expert, then maybe this isn't the speech that you should be giving. Let it to the subject matter experts, but you are an expert on something. So talk about the things you know. I think that's why it's easy for me at the beginning to talk about my family. I don't need notes to tell you that, that I've had this fabulous career and what I've done. And I don't need notes to tell you about my husband and my kids. And, so it's okay to talk about yourself, but know your subject. Always arrive early, you know what, and be prepared for anything to happen. So I am always 45 minutes to an hour early so that I can set up, know that my technology is going to work, and have time to breathe. It's really not a good thing when you have to race in at the last minute, and that's happened to me. I would have been stuck in traffic, and I had to race in and go right on. So just be prepared that anything can happen. I was speaking at the Alternative Dispute Resolution Conference the other week, and they didn't have my room set with a projector or screen. So I couldn't really use my PowerPoint and show it to the audience, and then they're trying to set it up while I'm trying to speak. So Toastmasters has taught me that if I'm prepared, I can continue and I can speak, and my words speak louder than my PowerPoint slides. I would say don't use technology that you don't understand or can't control. So I use quite a few videos, and at first that for me was very challenging because I didn't realize exactly how to do it, and now I've kind of overcome and found my workaround, and I can use videos successfully. But if you're going to put a video in, make sure that you know how you're going to get it to play. I now know how to get it to play on click, but that wasn't always the case, and that just takes time away from your presentation when you have to be fumbling with technology. So I would say keep it simple. If you don't know how to use it, don't use it. Use slides for your points only. So you could notice if you paid attention to our slides today, they're just talking points. People can read. So if you're going to put all of your data, everything you want to say on a slide and read it, you don't need to speak because people can read. They don't need you to say it. Use bullet points and speak and enlighten your audience with your information. So keep your slides to a minimum. No need to put your whole dissertation on your slides. And then here's another tip to just kind of help you as you put your presentation together. You can have multiple peers in a presentation. So if you break it down into 10-minute increments, or, shorter, if that's helpful to you. If you have an hour and you want to break it down into 6 minutes, 10 segments, and this is how I'm going to flow it, if that helps, that's how I initially started putting my presentations together, so I would have an idea of timing. And then, as Dan said, start on time, end on time. If you only have 5 people in the room at start time, they showed up on time. For their sake, start on time. Don't backpedal when the other people come in. Let them catch up to you. And then always, always, always end on time or a few minutes early. People will never will never be disappointed to get out of a session 5 minutes early. But they are kind of restless in their seat when you tend to go over time. So lastly, we just want to share with you about Toastmasters. You've heard both of us testify to how it has changed our lives. And so you can go to, I put the website for Toastmasters International on this slide. You can go to the website, and near the top right-hand side of the screen, you'll see Find a Location Near You. Click on that, put in your zip code, and you'll find out where all the Toastmaster meetings in your area are. I can promise you, it will be the best investment you can make in yourself personally and professionally. It's an extremely safe and supportive environment where you work at your own own pace. If you're afraid of questions that are going to come up during Q&A when you're speaking, Toastmasters has a portion of every meeting called table topics, and it's very awkward. I hated it, and I still don't even enjoy it. But it teaches you to think on your feet, and it will help you to competently address those questions that might come at you from your boss or from an interviewer or from a Q&A. That you'll be able to speak up with confidence. It will also teach you how to give and receive constructive feedback. So much of what we hear is criticism, and I look at it as criticism tears down. At Toastmasters, you will get constructive feedback. And since most of you are engineers, you know that construction builds up, and this constructive feedback that Dan and I have received through Toastmasters has helped us tremendously grow in our professions, and it has helped us influence others as well. So I want to leave you with my contact information. I am more than happy to help any of you. Dan is out in the field doing his water stuff, whatever it is he does with pipes and wastewater systems. But I am typically available. If you if you want to reach out to Dan, I think he would prefer that you reach out through me because I'm kind of the one who does this professionally. I just invited him to join me today for this particular audience. And so, if we see that there's a real need for him to jump in and help someone, I'm sure he would be happy to do that. But we are more than happy to help you become more savvy presenters, because, well, for me, I love just impacting people and impacting lives. So if I can help you overcome your fear of speaking, if I can help you put together an important presentation you need to do, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. And what time are we at? We're almost at the top of the hour. I do see that there's some questions here. Best technique for using an outline versus a written script. Okay, yeah, so let me just address that. I used to have a written script, and I used to be extremely dependent on my written script. I will tell you that since I've gotten away from the written script and know my outline, I was exactly like you, Kenneth, afraid of missing points, and afraid that my spoken words would not come out the way I wrote them. I had to let go of that, and it was not easy. I'm going to tell you it probably took me maybe 6 or 7 years, and just from a ton of practice to get away from the need for a written script. Now, today I had some of my things scripted, but really sometimes I just script it so I know where I'm going. But having the points on a slide that's my talking point. So I know that when I show that slide of my son at Mayo Clinic, that I want to tell his story. It doesn't matter how the words come out, I just want to tell that story. So let your slides be your guide, and I think that will help you overcome that, oh, what am I going to say? What if I forget? And if you forget something, the audience doesn't know. If it's an important statistic, put it on the slide. I hope that makes sense. Were there other questions? Yep, so I guess practicing and study would help with this, absolutely. I mean, we just say practice, 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 practice. I like to say that it's like playing a musical instrument. How do you become good at playing an instrument? You practice. How does an athlete become good at what they do? They practice and practice and practice and practice. And it's the same with public speaking is an art. You just have to practice, and it is so incredibly awkward, like playing that musical instrument for the first time. So incredibly awkward until eventually you get it. And again, I mean, you just practice, 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 and eventually you'll overcome your fears, and you'll become much more comfortable with it. Dan, is there anything else you want to add?
practice, practice, practice. It really is. It's like anything. I remember the first 5 speeches in Toastmasters were awful. There were 5 minutes really, and something clicked on the 6th speech. It wasn't good, but all of a sudden, you know, I screwed up, and instead of going into a panic, kind of took a deep breath and was able to get through it. And every time I did one, it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And unfortunately, I don't think there's another way around it other than putting into practice. But the good thing is it's a skill. You can learn it. It's like when you sat down the first time to take statistics or statics, you had no idea how to do it. I remember how I struggled in that. And then all of a sudden it clicked. And by the time you got to dynamics, it was like second nature. And now you're struggling with dynamics. And you can really learn this skill just by sitting down and working on it to the point that you need to take it to become confident, to become confident up there. I don't know that there's another way around it, really.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not something that you can practice in a closet like you can a musical instrument. You really have to do it in front of people, and that was my biggest fear as well. Yeah, I used to have huge meltdowns before I would have to speak. What am I doing? I'm not qualified. Nobody's going to want to listen to me. And now I'm out doing it, and I think nothing of it, and I get very little nerves, and I can speak in front of large audiences. But again, it was just practice, practice, practice.
Yeah, and I'll admit too, I mean, I used to sit at home and practice. At one point, they'd ask you in the meeting to get up and, you know, introduce yourself and explain what role you were doing in the meeting. I would sit at home and practice that for a half hour, and it was like 30 seconds. But that's what it took to get over and get comfortable. The funny thing is, when I think about it, in the end, it was 60 minutes in front of an audience is all that it took for me to really get this under control. Now, there were hours and hours outside of the meetings working on it, but that's what it took. And I think, like Beth said, you can practice at home, but you really got to get in front of people to see if it works. That's where the rubber meets the road.
It does. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and if there is anything we can do to help you overcome your anxiety of public speaking or just help you shine, we're more than happy to do it. Please feel free to reach out to us and let us help you. No need to sit behind your desk and fear it as Dan did for all those years when there's help out there.